Welcome everybody to Monday Night Live, my internet radio show. Tonight I've got some special guests from the Baltic states. When I arranged this, there hadn't been any excitement in Ukraine, and I thought we were just going to talk about cultures and the wonderful scenery and everything else in the Baltics, but I think things have slightly moved on since then. I'm just going to share my screen with a few slides and just to give you a little bit of an overview. Just looking at the Baltic states, which are very interesting countries on the side of the Baltic Sea, but with Russia and Belarus on the other side. Iron Curtain countries. They've been in and out of wars, and for the last 30 years they joined NATO and joined the European Union, which has been fabulous for them. But just below Lithuania is part of Russia, which is called Kaliningrad, which is stocked up with all sorts of weapons, I understand. And I am going to go to Val, who's from Lithuania and Belarus first. But I got this idea because of Chris Tarrant's train program, when he caught a train from the north of Estonia to the south of Lithuania. A fascinating program. And Anu, who's going to join us as soon as her computer works, was out in the snow this weekend, sent me these photos from her country house, summer house, which doesn't quite look like a summer house at the moment. So thanks for joining me, everybody. And let's go now to Val. Val's in London, and Val is originally from Lithuania and from Belarus. Are you there, Val?
I'm here. Hi, Derek.
Hi, Val. Tell us a little bit about your story about Lithuania and Belarus.
Sure. So I was born in Lithuania because my mom decided to do her degree in Lithuania. At that time, Kaunas University was the best medical university in Europe. And she decided to move there to get her education and settle down in Lithuania. And this is where I was born. And my family, or my parents, still live in Lithuania, but I grew up in Belarus. It happened so that at the age of about 2 months, I moved to Belarus, and I spent 17 years of my life in Belarus. That's why I do have Lithuanian passport, which is at the moment gives me lots of privileges, I would imagine. But I consider myself Belarusian because this is where I grew up. This is where my grandparents live. This is where I spent my childhood before I moved to the UK.
Wow, fantastic. Now, what's the difference between Belarus and Lithuania? What are the outstanding features?
I guess the difference is quite significant. Probably even there are obviously lots of similarities in terms of the culture and everything, because historically the two countries have been quite closely linked. But Lithuania was the first country who decided to gain its independence after the collapse of USSR in 1991, and it is quite a modern, advanced, pro-Western country, I would say, while Belarus is still very much living in the age of trying to recover from communism, but still having some features there, as unfortunately we are quite known in the world to have the last dictatorship in Europe, and it is still present, and unfortunately we are all facing it there. It's quite a big problem. And in terms of people, I guess there are also lots of similarities, but some differences as well. I think when people meet Lithuanian people, they consider them being very serious because we are not very expressive in terms of the emotions. We don't smile at everyone, as for example, lots of people here in the UK do. For us, we need to gain trust of that particular person to be able to express our true feelings and true emotion. That's why I think sometimes we're being perceived as very serious people, concentrating on serious issues, which is not true. I guess it's just a cultural aspect. We are quite intelligent, I would say as well, because about 93% of the population in Lithuania have secondary education. And I would also say that from Lithuanians, the main cultural aspect would be we are quite nostalgic as well, that sometimes we like to think about our traditions, we like to celebrate lots of different religious holidays together in the family, and family is quite a big thing. With Belarusians, I guess the differences are we are very friendly and very welcoming, so we are probably less serious than Lithuanian people are being perceived. We are taught from an early age to help people around us. It's one of our features. Our doors are open to not only neighbors, but people who are in need. This is how I was taught and brought up by my grandparents back in the days. So we are known for our kindness. We are quite tolerant as well, I would say. And maybe it could be perceived from both sides, something that is positive, but also something that is negative, probably because we are so tolerant. This is the situation or current economic situations that we ended up being in. But we are also very hardworking, because I think, again, it goes back to some historical events where we had to work quite hard to look after the land, to bring up the agriculture. And actually, Belarus was one of the most advanced countries before the collapse of USSR in terms of agriculture back in the days.
Wow. Okay. That's fantastic. And we did talk about this at the rehearsal last week, didn't we? How are people feeling at the moment?
I guess if you ask me from the Belarusian side, I would probably speak more on that, because most of my friends and obviously my grandparents are residing there. At the moment, with the current events, I think we are quite terrified, and we are, of course, very worried about the world events happening. We are also being quite, negatively perceived on social media, because unfortunately people are seeing us as someone who supports the, this whole special operation, as it's being called in Russia, against Ukraine, which is not true at all. If you talk to lots of people, we are, of course, trying to find ways how to help. We have been fighting for our own freedom and independence since August 2020, since the disputed elections. Lots of my friends and some family members, unfortunately, went through quite a significant prison sentences because of them not supporting the current government, and have been quite heavily affected. I myself always find it difficult to go back home and to be able to see my family and visit them, because I always have issues of different sorts at the border when I'm trying to enter the country. So we all are quite horrified with the recent events. Everything that is happening on the Russian side is obviously we are being affected by that, because we are being seen as allies. And yes, I guess it's quite a sad time for everyone at the moment. And we are, and by we, I mean our young community of people are trying to support and find ways how to help Ukraine as much as we can.
Well, thanks, Val. Thanks for sharing that with us, and we do wish you well. Val's starting a new job today, actually, in London as well, so she's still found the time to join us on a Monday Night Live. You left Moody's last week, and who is it you've just joined today?
Working for Google.
Working for Google. Well, congratulations for that, and thanks for joining us. I hope you'll stay on while we go to some of my other guests. That was absolutely brilliant, and wish you, your friends, and everybody well. Okay, now I'm going to switch to Eva, who is in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But Eva was born in Estonia and grew up in Estonia, and before she moved to America to take her degree. Eva, something resonates with what Val said about people from the Baltic states being reserved And I remember when I went to speak for Vask in Estonia, people didn't smile at me. They didn't come up to me until I'd finished speaking. Eva, is that the whole of the Baltic states are like that then?
I would think so. I would think so. But interestingly enough, in Estonia, we think that Lithuanians are the Italians of the Baltic states. So we take it to the next level when it comes to reservedness and seriousness.
Oh, really? So, what you meant by Italians, you meant they were upfront and...
Yes, emotional and outgoing and happy and smiling. So as reserved as Lithuanians are, they are still way more smiling than Estonians.
Oh, wow. Well, tell us a little bit about when you grew up in Estonia. What was your memories?
Well, I was born and raised in the Soviet Union, so it's been interesting to look back at my childhood because, of course, the state propaganda was pretty severe when you look back, but I was lucky enough to be born into a family that was strongly anti-regime. I remember when I was 5 years old, my uncle would sing with me anti-Soviet songs in the back room of the house, and he would tell me, make sure you don't sing these songs anywhere, but it's important to know these songs. So definitely sort of two conflicting worldviews in my childhood, but not everybody was happy. I recently spoke to somebody from Poland, and she said that to her it was a cultural shock to come to the United States in the 90s because her historic consciousness was very different how the rest of the West saw World War II and the aftermath.
Wow. And I think you told me that your granny had never been outside the village she's born in, and she asked you never to leave the village as well. Was that right?
Yes, that's true. And this is the case right now in Estonia as well, considering the political climate. The same as it is Ukraine. Where are you going to go? This is the home, and this is where you're going to stay, and that's what you're going to fight for and die for.
Fantastic. Now I'm going to switch to Anna and see if Anna can talk to us even without the Zoom. Are you without the picture? Are you there, Anna?
Yes, I am very here.
With we're still with no pictures.
With no pictures. Unfortunately, this computer doesn't work with me today. I'm really sorry. But if I could add some words to what Eva said,
yes,
wait
please.
until you get also one Finn here, because if we are talking about Finnish people, they are even more reserved. For example, we have a joke in Estonia that, if you tell a joke today, they would understand it tomorrow. So it's even worse. And yeah, I would agree with Eva, and I would agree with what Valerija said. And I was born also during Soviet regime, and I guess I am a little bit older than you guys, Eva and Valerija are. And I remember also the times when we were not allowed to celebrate Christmas time, and you had to put on curtains so that nobody could see that you were celebrating Christmas. You were not allowed to go to the church because the teachers were standing in front of the church, and they were marking down all the names who went to the church, because at that time it was not the case that you could celebrate Christmas. That is also something I always remember. But in my home, we always celebrated Christmas. Yeah.
And just to add here, Derek, it's interesting to always pay attention how any single nation is telling the story of the past. We sometimes dismiss history as it's not as scientific, or it's not part of science, it's unimportant. But the way the Russian history today tells the story of going to church and practicing of freedom of religion being illegal technically in the Soviet Union, they would say that it wasn't illegal, it was strongly discouraged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Words are very important.
Although I was born in the area of Estonia where most Russian-speaking population lives, the ratio was around, like, it is still even nowadays, 80% of Russians and Russian-speaking people and 20% of Estonians. It is near the Russian border, the town called Narva, which is the most eastern part, the most eastern border of the European Union. So this is where I was born. But thanks to that, we always look at the bright side of life. I speak Russian.
you do seem very positive, Anu. When we met in 2008, when I spoke at your conference, and even with what's going on now, you are a very positive person. So congratulations about that. How's
Thank
everyone
you.
feeling at the moment?
Very well.
Okay, no, about the situation that's going on in Ukraine and NATO and everything else. We did discuss that slightly last week, didn't we?
Mm.
Okay. Okay. Well, I guess you'd rather not say anything, so that's fine. And we agreed that if you didn't want to answer any questions, we would move on. Now, we saw your summer house on the pictures you sent me this morning. That looked absolutely beautiful. How cold was it out there?
In winter, it was -25, I would say. It was really, really cold, and it's an old-fashioned house where you still have to bring in some wood and make some fire. And that is like being at my granny's. It is how people used to live like 100 years ago, and I managed to keep the house as it is. So it's really nice. And to be honest, I also wanted to add something about Ukraine. I think that, if I may say so, I hope you don't mind.
Please do.
If people are not talking about it, I think it is not right. We still need to talk about it, and we are free people. We need to express ourselves how we feel. We feel sad, we feel shocked. I think that it's not right if we don't talk about it.
No, I understand that. I understand that. We are absolutely bombarded by the news about it here. So people are talking about it all the time, which is, I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's certainly very, very current. And we're delighted that the UK's sent some more troops to Estonia, because I think Estonia is part of the British contingent of NATO. I think that's what I've understood.
Yeah, and we feel very grateful for all the support all the other countries have given to us. And it is kind of walking in a very thin line, because we have all heard probably that what will happen next. There are also some views that people think if Russia decides to invade further, then the Baltics would be the next. I don't want to think about it, but there have been discussions on that on our TV. People have asked about it. Although we try to stay positive, I think that this is something that makes us all think what would happen next. Am I prepared for that?
Sure. Well, you have our total support, and thank you for coming on and talking to us. And if we may get you back again on a Monday Night Live in a few weeks' time when your camera works, that would be even better.
Yeah, I'm really sorry about that.
No, it's okay. But I did think you were the high-tech capital of the world, but that would be my English joke, wouldn't it, Anna? I'd like to go to California now, to Janice Litvin, who's been a star of Monday Night Live before with her book Banish Burnout. Janice, your granny came from Latvia, I believe, and I think they got a train to Ireland and caught a boat to New York to avoid the Nazis. What's the story?
I believe they left from Liverpool, actually, and I was just thinking about that last week, how the trauma and the terror of having to commute all across Europe to get from Latvia to England to pick up a boat. But what I wanted to talk about was, I was thinking a lot when Valerija and Eva and Anu were speaking about the culture. So being Jewish in Eastern Europe was a different experience that added another layer of persecution. And so what informed their lives, so quite often people say, are you Jewish or are you American? How do you identify yourselves? Well, in Latvia and all the countries of that area, you were Jewish first, because that's how the country identified you, and that's how they chose to treat you, whether it was the government and sometimes the citizens around you, sometimes neighbors. And sadly, as you know, people love to hate people who are different from ourselves. And, you know, I don't want to get into world religion as a basis for wars, but which is not in the case of Ukraine and Russia. But what I wanted to say was that family mores and how, even though I was not born in Latvia, my mother was, she left as a baby, but the attitudes and the cultural differences filtered down to the next generations. And so when you say we're a melting pot, or when you go into let's say you go into a corporate situation and you see people from China and India and Russia, even the Americans still have semblances of their cultural differences from generations past, because all the stories and all the attitudes and all the preferences got passed along through the generations. For example, the identifying story of my entire life was that my grandfather had to escape the Cossacks because of persecution. And so that, and then there was a little vignette that he got pretty far and then he had to turn around and go back for my mother and grandmother. And then imagine being on the boat. She was pregnant, and I'm sure the boats were very, very crowded. And imagine having morning sickness and being on a boat, and people getting sick and getting cholera and all the diseases they got. It's a miracle they survived the boat trip itself, not to mention the crowds in New York and all the rest, and trying to survive in a country where you didn't know the language and you didn't know the people. Now, in New York, there were, of course, many, many immigrants, so I'm sure there was some more camaraderie, but eventually they went to Houston because there was an uncle, my grandmother's mother's brother was in Houston. So my grandmother's mother and two of her brothers went straight to Houston, Texas from Latvia, which seems odd to me. Like, how would you choose Houston, Texas from Latvia? But there was family there and they were supported. And in those days, and I'm sure it's been true through many decades, you had to have a sponsor to get into the United States because the government did not want you to be a burden. I think that's still true today. You had to show that you were healthy and that you could earn a living. So you had to have a sponsor. And so going straight from Latvia to Houston seems so foreign to me, because can you imagine the cultural shift and trying to get along with people and building community in I call it a strange place, because Houston, as you know, has a lot of rich history in their ways of thinking and doing things, which certainly was true back then and through my childhood. But the persecution complex lives on from generation to generation. And also one of you mentioned rebelliousness. My mother was extremely rebellious growing up, and I inherited that trait. But interestingly, it was the rebelliousness that allowed my family to survive, because without taking the risk of going against the grain and running off, they wouldn't have survived. So I owe that rebelliousness to their survival. Another lesson my mother used to teach me, which I think is very true in that part of the world, is if you didn't suffer, you didn't accomplish anything. So in other words, hard work was a huge requirement to survive and to thrive. Whereas in the last few decades, we're taught in cultural parlance, oh, it's not about working hard, it's about working smart. But I was always taught if you didn't work really, really hard, you didn't deserve the rewards that you might have received. And I think sometimes I make I make my success harder on myself, because I don't think I always take the easy way out, because back in the back of my mind, my mother's telling me, you have to work really hard.
That's fantastic, Janice. Is that right? I mean, we're raising some real cultural issues here that maybe people don't realize. The one thing I didn't realize is you said, are you Jewish or are you American? Is that seriously what happens?
Well, as you know, a lot of people resent the Jewish people and the Jewish culture in America, for all sorts of reasons that I won't break down for you.
No, I didn't want to go there. I was just surprised because I don't think, and somebody will correct me, that would happen in England. Okay, I think we're beyond that, or I hope we are, or maybe I'm naive. I don't know, but
Well, I hope so.
We'll tackle that after the recording, I think. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. I was just in Savannah, Georgia for a speaking engagement, and we went to Hilton Head, which I don't know if anyone knows. It's a resort island off the coast of South Carolina, 1 hour northeast of Savannah, Georgia.
Some very good golf courses there. We know.
Yes. Yes. So I have a high school friend that got married and moved there as kind of a retirement community. They love golf. And we were drinking, you know, casually, but the husband started asking us questions about being Jewish and is it true that Jews care about having a lot of money? I mean, it just was shocking to me how people think based on, and this gentleman was brought up in the Bronx where I'm sure he grew up around a lot of Jewish people, but there are a lot of negative, as you know, connotations about the Jewish people and our emphasis on education and money. And at least people think it's all about the money. It's not, but yes, money is a measure of success. There are more important measures, but it's just shocking to me how people have these preconceived notions about Judaism and other religions, not just Judaism.
Yeah, sure. I'd like to go to Denmark now to Mavet, who's been patiently waiting. Those of you that know your geography will know that if you're in the Baltics, you've got to sail right around Denmark to get out into the Atlantic Ocean. So, and of course, Denmark's where all the Vikings came from, plundering the UK thousands and thousands of years ago. Welcome, Yvette. Any thoughts from what you've been listening to today?
Yes. Well, I must say that having talked about the Baltics and also adding the religious item just very lastly, yes, I'm born in Denmark and I actually live in Copenhagen. You did right, Aarhus, which is the second biggest town, which is where I was born, so it wasn't incorrect.
I was close.
Yeah, you were very close. My parents are from Turkey. It's the traditional immigrant story. And I was born here and raised here. I've lived in London, and I've known you for a couple of years, many years, decades, I would say, Derek. I would say that Danes are pretty frivolous compared to the other cultures we've discussed. Very, very open-minded, very direct. They'll speak their minds, and they have been used to do that for decades, really. Also during the war, and therefore, what we are witnessing today with Ukraine, Russia, even what I witnessed in Turkey, where you can't speak your truth, or where if you do so, it will have consequences, is very far from the way we are living our life here in Denmark. But also, that said, frivolous, open-minded, there are still prejudices around, which I have also experienced on my own body, not that much today as I did like 10 or 15 years ago or 20 years ago maybe, but I am born into the Muslim culture or religion, if you may say. I'm very open-minded. One of my very best friends, she's Jewish and she actually lives in Israel, Tel Aviv. We met in London. So that goes, but I could easily see a Dane ask, is it true that Jews, they still do this and that? Like they would ask me, is it true that Muslims, they'll do this and that? Which doesn't happen. When I lived in London, you would never refer to a person that person was Black, or that person was Asian, or that person was, that's a true melting pot, I have to say, or at least London was for me, and I still believe it is, without being overly protective of other cultures, which I also like. So I was quite surprised when I heard a few years ago that it was being discussed whether we should still continue calling, naming Christmas Christmas rather than something else, which is completely stupid to me, because of course Christmas is Christmas. But this is just to tell that I do believe we all nations, we are on a journey. We are evolving. Some countries, and specifically if they're bigger, perhaps slower than others, but as I can hear from Estonia and Latvia, there are some slow moves, but that's also, you know, based on the history. And actually, that said, today Instagram is not too bad, I would say. But today I just read this this message from a guy called Deepak Chopra. I guess some of you may know who he is. I thought it was quite clever words, and I just want to read them out for you, because he says, bloodshed and murder in Ukraine will recycle as epigenic trauma for generations. Russian friends, do not allow a single impotent psychopath to ruin the life of your descendants and those of your brothers and sisters in Ukraine. Civil disobedience and peaceful strikes by you could turn the tide of history. And I have to say that I believe very much in that, and I believe very much in historic traumas, and that's what we carry, and that's also what I have witnessed today. That is also what I hear. So everything that we can do as human citizens to fight against that and to stay peaceful and respectful would definitely help. And I guess that's the last bit, the respectful part, that Putin hasn't learned that yet. But I guess he's still a little child, so we'll see. A young soul.
Thanks, Mervat. That's very insightful. I'm shocked, actually. I have to say, I'm shocked living in London and traveling into London, which is said to be one of the most multicultural societies in the world, that some of these things are still going on. I thought we'd grown up and got over them. I know there's been pockets of it in the UK, but I didn't realize in other countries it was still like that. But we're all learning all the time, always learning, etc. I just want to thank my guests before I turn the recording off. I wanted to thank Anu Vask, who's actually in Estonia, Eva Fanani, who's in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Val, who's in London, but from Lithuania and grew up in Belarus, Janice Litvin in California, but whose granny and mum were born in Latvia, and Mervat Sahin for coming on from Denmark. And I'm going to throw, there's one or two questions I'm going to ask in the box, but once we've closed the recording. So can I thank you for joining me? Any questions? You can find our speakers on LinkedIn. Anything you want to fire at me, send me an email at action@derekarden.co.uk. If you're joining this on YouTube or watching this or listening to this on the Negotiators podcast, thank you. And please do join us live when you get the opportunity.